The howl of wind through the skeletal remains of what once was civilization had become so familiar that Elias barely noticed it anymore. 10 years since the collapse, and the world remained a wasteland of rusted metal, crumbling concrete, and toxic air that required filtration masks for extended exposure. Humanity, or what was left of it, survived in scattered pockets, desperate communities clinging to existence in the aftermath of environmental collapse, nuclear fallout, and the subsequent societal breakdown. Elias stood atop the watchtower constructed from salvaged materials, scanning the horizon where the setting sun cast long shadows across the barren landscape. New Haven, their settlement of 300 souls, was nestled in what once had been a small college campus, its stone buildings providing both shelter and defense. They had walls now, reinforced with scavenged metal and watched over by those like himself, guardians keeping vigil against the many threats that prowled beyond their boundaries. Movement at the northern perimeter called Jacob from the adjacent tower. Single figure, moving fast. Elias raised his binoculars, focusing on the lone silhouette racing across open ground toward their gates. Behind the runner, a dust cloud rose, raiders on improvised vehicles. His stomach tightened. Raiders meant death, meant loss. They had attacked 3 weeks prior, killing 7 of New Haven's people before being driven back. Sound the alarm, Elias ordered, already descending the ladder. Get everyone inside the main hall. Defensive positions now. The community moved with practiced efficiency. Mothers gathering children, the elderly being escorted to safety, fighters taking positions along the walls. They had drilled for this dozens of times, perfecting their response through painful experience. Elias grabbed his rifle, checking the ammunition before heading to the main gate where several defenders had gathered. Open it, he commanded, just enough to let the runner through. The figure was closer now, a blur of motion wrapped in tattered clothing, a mask covering the face, standard in the wastelands. What caught Elias's attention was the grace with which the stranger moved, fluid and purposeful despite clear exhaustion. The gate creaked open just wide enough, and the figure slipped through the gap moments before it slammed shut behind them. The stranger collapsed to one knee, breathing heavily, head bowed. "Who are you?" Elias demanded, keeping his rifle trained on the newcomer. Trust was a luxury few could afford. The masked figure looked up, revealing only eyes behind the weathered respirator. Eyes that seemed strangely familiar, though Elias couldn't place them. The stranger offered no response, only gesturing urgently toward the approaching raiders. "If you led them here," Elias began, but was interrupted as the first shots pinged against the metal gate. The raiders arrived in a cloud of dust and noise, 15 strong on weaponized vehicles cobbled together from the remains of before. Their leader, a hulking man with a flame-painted helmet, stood in the back of a modified pickup. "We know you've got supplies," he shouted. "Food, medicine, women. Hand them over, and maybe we'll only kill half of you." The standard threat, the standard promise of violence. Elias had heard it all before. New Haven had survived because they never surrendered, never negotiated. "You know our answer," Elias called back. "It's the same as last time. Leave now, or none of you will." The raider leader laughed, signaling his men. They began spreading out, preparing for an assault. New Haven's defenders tensed, weapons ready. What happened next occurred so quickly that Elias could barely process it. The masked stranger was suddenly in motion, vaulting the wall in a move that seemed impossible for any normal human. Before the raiders could react, the figure landed among them, moving with lethal precision. A blade flashed. Where had it come from? Slicing through the first raider's throat. The stranger spun, kicked, stabbed, moved from one target to the next with brutal efficiency. It wasn't just skill. It was something more, something almost supernatural in its perfection. 5 raiders fell in seconds. The remaining attackers focused their fire on this new threat, but the stranger was always elsewhere, impossible to track, a ghost among living men. Those on the wall, including Elias, provided covering fire, taking advantage of the chaos. In less than 2 minutes, it was over. 12 raiders dead, 3 fleeing into the wasteland, abandoning their vehicles and weapons. The masked stranger stood amidst the carnage, blade dripping, seemingly untouched. Elias ordered the gate opened, leading a small group out to recover the abandoned supplies and weapons, precious resources in their world of scarcity. The stranger remained motionless, watching them work with an unnerving stillness. "You want to tell us who you are now?" Elias asked, approaching cautiously. No response. Not a word, not a gesture. Just those eyes, observing him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You're welcome to come inside," he offered, despite his better judgment. Something about this silent warrior drew him in, sparked curiosity he couldn't explain. "We have food, clean water. You've earned that much at least." The stranger tilted their head slightly, as if considering, then nodded once and followed him inside. Word spread quickly through New Haven about the masked savior. Some called the stranger Wraith or Ghost for the way they had moved among the raiders. Others whispered darker suspicions. No normal person fought like that, moved like that. Was this one of the rumored government experiments from before? A survivor enhanced by forbidden science? The stranger accepted their hospitality, but remained silent, communicating only through gestures or written notes when absolutely necessary. The mask never came off. Not for eating. The stranger would disappear to consume food in private. Not for sleeping, if the stranger slept at all. Many reported seeing the figure patrolling the walls at all hours. Elias found himself drawn to this enigma. Against all logic, he began to trust the silent warrior, who took to standing guard near him during community meetings, accompanying him on scavenging missions, watching over him like some appointed protector. "You know," Elias said one evening as they sat by the community fire, "most people have names, or at least speak occasionally." The stranger turned that same intense gaze toward him, but remained silent. "I'm going to call you Wraith, if that's all right. Everyone else already does." A slight nod was the only acknowledgement. Weeks passed, and Wraith became an unofficial guardian of New Haven. The community benefited from the stranger's exceptional combat abilities and seemingly instinctive knowledge of the surrounding wasteland. Yet suspicion lingered. Some feared what might lurk behind that mask, what secrets those silent lips kept. Elias defended Wraith against these suspicions, though he couldn't explain why. Something about those eyes haunted him, as if they contained a message he was failing to read. It was during a routine scavenging mission that everything changed. Elias, Wraith, and 3 others were exploring the ruins of what had once been a research facility, hoping to find medicine or usable technology. The concrete structure was largely intact, its reinforced walls having withstood both the initial disasters and the decade of neglect that followed. As they moved through darkened corridors, Elias noticed Wraith's unusual behavior. The silent warrior seemed agitated, pausing at certain doorways, trailing fingers along specific walls as if following a map only they could see. "You've been here before," Elias realized, speaking the thought aloud. Wraith froze for a moment, then continued forward without acknowledgement. But the reaction confirmed Elias's suspicion. They split into teams to cover more ground, with Elias and Wraith taking the lower level while the others searched above. As they delved deeper into the facility's basement, the air grew stale, heavy with dust and a lingering chemical smell that permeated many pre-collapsed structures. Elias was examining an abandoned laboratory when he heard a sound from Wraith, the first vocalization he'd ever witnessed from the silent warrior. It was a sharp intake of breath, almost a gasp. He turned to find Wraith standing motionless before a wall of faded photographs, scientific certificates, and personnel badges. "What is it?" Elias asked, moving closer. Wraith's hand reached out, trembling slightly, to touch one of the photographs. It showed a team of scientists standing before the facility's entrance, smiling with the confident optimism of the before times. Elias leaned in to examine it more closely, and felt the world tilt beneath him. There, among the row of faces, was a younger version of himself. Hair shorter, face less weathered by hardship, but unmistakably him. Standing proudly in a lab coat, Dr. Elias Mercer, neurological research printed on the badge pinned to his chest. Memories crashed through his mind like shattered glass. Fragments of life he had buried so deeply he had convinced himself it never existed. Dr. Elias Mercer. The Prometheus Project. Experimental neural interfaces designed to enhance human potential. The accident. The fire. The screams. He staggered back, breathing heavily, as the locked rooms of his mind burst open. "I worked here," he whispered, more to himself than to Wraith. "Before the collapse. I was one of them. The ones who thought they could play God." Wraith was watching him with those intense eyes, now filled with something new. Anticipation, perhaps. Or dread. "Why don't I remember? Why did I block it all out?" Elias pressed his palms against his temples, trying to order the flood of returning memories. The project went wrong. Something happened. Something terrible. He looked up suddenly, staring at Wraith with new suspicion. "You knew. You brought me here on purpose." Wraith neither confirmed nor denied, standing motionless as Elias fought through his returning past. On the journey back to New Haven, Elias was unnaturally quiet, struggling with fragments of memory that refused to form a coherent whole. Images flashed behind his eyes. Laboratory fixtures, experimental subjects, a terminal displaying failing vital signs, fire alarms, smoke-filling corridors, a hand reaching out. That night, as the community slept, Elias returned to his quarters to find something placed carefully on his bed. A small metal object, tarnished with age, an access badge for the research facility. Not his own, but another's. The photo was damaged, the name partially obscured, but he could make out Dr. Sarah before the rest was lost to corrosion. The name sparked something, a face, a laugh, a feeling of warmth followed by crushing guilt. He clutched the badge, trying to force his mind to complete the connection. When he looked up, Wraith stood in the doorway, watching. "You left this for me," Elias said, holding up the badge. "You're trying to make me remember something. Remember her. Who is she to me? Who is she to you?" For the first time, Wraith made a deliberate communicative gesture, pointing first to the badge, then to Elias's heart, then to the mask that concealed their identity. A thread connected in Elias's fractured memory, but before he could pursue it, alarms sounded throughout the settlement. He grabbed his weapon, Wraith already moving toward the source of the commotion. New Haven was under attack again, but not by raiders this time. Something worse had found them. The creatures moved on all fours, but they had once been human. Mutations from the radiation zones, their skin was mottled gray and hairless, eyes enlarged and sensitive to light, making them hunt primarily at night. The collapsed called them crawlers, and they hunted in packs, driven by insatiable hunger. Dozens of them swarmed the eastern wall, climbing with inhuman agility, falling upon the unprepared guards. Elias and Wraith arrived to find the defenders in disarray, several already wounded or dead. "Fall back to the inner buildings," Elias shouted, firing at the creatures as they poured over the wall. "Get the children to the bunker." The community fought desperately, but the crawlers kept coming, more numerous than any pack they'd encountered before. For everyone they killed, two more seemed to take its place. Wraith fought with characteristic efficiency, blade flashing in the moonlight, moving from one threat to the next without hesitation. But even the silent warrior couldn't be everywhere at once. As the survivors retreated toward the central building, a group of crawlers broke through their defensive line, lunging toward a cluster of children being evacuated. Elias fired until his weapon clicked empty, then drew his knife, placing himself between the creatures and their prey. He managed to kill two before a third tackled him to the ground, its elongated fingers wrapping around his throat. He struggled, the knife just beyond his reach, the creature's face inches from his own, its jaw unhinging to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. A blur of motion, and suddenly the creature was gone, lifted bodily and hurled away. Wraith stood over him, offering a hand. Elias took it, allowing himself to be pulled to his feet. "Thanks," he gasped, retrieving his knife. "We need to get everyone inside." His words died as he saw Wraith stumble, the first sign of weakness he'd ever witnessed from a warrior. Looking closer, he saw the spreading dark stain on Wraith's side. One of the creatures had managed to wound the seemingly invincible fighter. "You're hurt," Elias said, moving to support Wraith, who pushed him away with surprising force, gesturing toward the retreating civilians. "I'm not leaving you," Elias insisted, surprising himself with the vehemence of the statement. Together, they covered the retreat, fighting side by side, as if they'd done so for years rather than weeks. Something about it felt familiar to Elias, a rhythm, a synchronicity that went beyond conscious coordination. By dawn, the attack had been repelled. 23 people from New Haven were dead, but the survivors had managed to kill or drive off the crawler pack. The community began the grim task of burying their dead and repairing their defenses. Elias found Wraith sitting alone on the edge of the settlement, looking out over the wasteland as the sun rose. The warrior's posture showed pain, one hand pressed against the wounded side. "Let me help you," Elias said, approaching with medical supplies. "That needs treatment." Wraith shook their head, beginning to rise, but faltered, clearly weaker than they wanted to admit. "Don't be stubborn," Elias insisted. "Even legendary wasteland warriors need patching up sometimes." After a moment of consideration, Wraith nodded once, allowing Elias to approach. "I need to see the wound," Elias explained. "Can you move your clothing aside?" Wraith hesitated, then slowly lifted the tattered jacket, revealing a deep gash along the ribs. But what caught Elias's attention wasn't the wound itself. It was the skin surrounding it. Pale, yes, but marked with a pattern of scars that formed a distinctive geometric design, almost like circuit pathways beneath the skin. Elias's breath caught as another memory surfaced. "Neural interface mapping," he whispered. "From the Prometheus project." Wraith went completely still. "You were part of it," Elias continued, his voice hollow with realization. "You were one of the test subjects, one of the volunteers." His hands moved automatically, cleaning and bandaging the wound, while his mind raced through implications. "That's how you can fight like that. How you can move the way you do." The interface enhanced neural response times, physical capabilities. It was supposed to create the perfect soldier. He secured the bandage and sat back. But something went wrong. The interfaces became unstable. They caused neurological damage, psychological breaks. The subjects began to. He trailed off, another fragment of memory clicking into place. They began to lose themselves, their identities, their memories. Wraith was watching him intently now, eyes never leaving his face. "We were trying to fix it," Elias continued, the story of his past unfolding before him. "Sarah and I, we were developing a reversal protocol when the collapse began. When everything fell apart, the name brought another flash of memory. A woman with auburn hair tied back in a practical ponytail, intelligent eyes that crinkled when she smiled, a voice that could shift from scientific precision to warm laughter in an instant. Sarah, he repeated, the name like a key unlocking another door in his mind. Sarah Mitchell. She was my colleague, my partner." He paused, emotions welling up from depths he hadn't known existed. She was more than that. Wraith reached out slowly, carefully, and took his hand. The gesture was so unexpected, so human from the usually detached warrior, that Elias could only stare in confusion. Before he could question it, Jacob appeared, breathless from running. "Elias, Council's called an emergency meeting. Scouts have reported something massive heading our way from the north. Too big to be raiders." The moment broken, Wraith withdrew, rising with visible effort despite the injury. Elias nodded to Jacob. "I'll be right there." As Jacob left, Elias turned back to Wraith. "We're not done with this conversation. There's more you know, more I need to remember." Wraith gave a single, solemn nod. The emergency council meeting confirmed their worst fears. A warlord known as Sovereign, who had been consolidating power in the wasteland by conquering or destroying smaller settlements, was advancing toward New Haven with a force of over 100 fighters and armed vehicles. The scouts had observed them less than 2 days' march away. "We can't fight that many," said Rebecca, the settlement's medical officer. "Not even with our walls, not even with." She glanced at Wraith, who stood silently in the corner of the room. "Whatever advantages we might have, And we can't evacuate everyone in time, added Jacob. The children, the wounded, the elderly, they'd never make it through the wasteland. What about negotiation? Suggested another council member. Offer tribute allegiance? Elias shook his head. Sovereign doesn't leave intact power structures. Anyone seen as a leader is executed publicly. I've heard the stories from refugees. It would just be delaying the inevitable. The room fell silent, the weight of their seemingly impossible situation pressing down on everyone present. After a moment, Wraith stepped forward, drawing all eyes. For the first time since arriving at New Haven, the silent warrior pulled out a small notepad and wrote something, sliding it across the table to Elias. He read it aloud. There's another option. The facility we visited. Underground levels. Secure. Supplies still there. Murmurs spread through the room as Elias stared at the note, then at Wraith. How do you know about the lower levels? They were restricted access only. Even I only went down there a few times. Wraith wrote again. Trust me. Can lead everyone there. Safe passage, I know. Elias felt the weight of every eye in the room on him. It's at least a day's journey, he said slowly, through dangerous territory. And I don't know what condition the facility would be in after all this time. Better than certain death here, Rebecca pointed out. At least it gives us a chance. After further debate, the council agreed. They would evacuate to the research facility, using hidden routes that Wraith apparently knew. The preparation began immediately, gathering supplies, organizing groups, preparing the weakest for travel. As the community mobilized, Elias found Wraith standing alone, staring at a crude map of the region spread out on a table. You know more than you're letting on, Elias said quietly. About everything. The facility. Me. My past. Wraith nodded without looking up. I need to know why, Elias continued. Why save us? Why lead us there specifically? What aren't you telling me? Wraith finally looked up, eyes conveying a depth of emotion that startled Elias. The warrior wrote a single word on the notepad. Soon. The evacuation began at dawn. 300 people moving as quietly as possible through the wasteland, taking hidden paths through dried riverbeds and the ruins of forgotten suburbs. Wraith led the way, seemingly knowing every safe passage, every potential danger. Elias walked beside the silent warrior, his mind still trying to reconstruct his fragmented past. The memories were returning in greater detail now. His work at the facility, the Prometheus project, the subjects who volunteered for neural enhancement. And Sarah. Her face was clearer now, her voice almost audible in his mind. They had been more than colleagues. Much more. They had planned a future together, even as the world around them showed signs of the coming collapse. They had believed their work might help humanity survive what was coming. We were trying to save the world, Elias murmured, the realization coming to him as they walked. The Prometheus project wasn't just military. We saw the signs: environmental tipping points, resource wars, societal instability. We were trying to create humans who could survive what was coming. Wraith glanced at him but kept moving, leading the group around a collapsed highway overpass. But something went wrong, Elias continued, speaking more to himself than to Wraith. The subjects, something happened to them, and then the collapse accelerated. Everything fell apart faster than anyone predicted. By midday, they had covered impressive ground, but the pace was taking its toll on the weaker members of the community. During a brief rest period, Jacob approached with troubling news. Scouts spotted dust clouds behind us, he reported quietly, not wanting to spread panic. Sovereign's forces may have found New Haven empty and figured out we're on the move. Elias looked to Wraith, who nodded grimly and wrote, Need to move faster. Alternative route. More dangerous, but quicker. What kind of danger? Elias asked. Wraith hesitated, then wrote, Radiation pocket. Have to pass through edge. Short exposure only. Have enough masks for everyone. They didn't. Not nearly enough radiation filtering masks for the entire community. They had time to fabricate more from available materials, but it would slow them down further. How bad is the radiation? Elias asked. Wraith wrote, Survivable with brief exposure. Better than Sovereign. The decision was made. They would take the shorter route through the edge of a radiation zone, rotating the limited masks among the most vulnerable. It was a calculated risk, but with Sovereign's forces closing in, they had little choice. As they prepared to move out, Elias noticed Wraith examining the makeshift mask supply, setting certain ones aside. When he approached, Wraith quickly wrote, "These for children. Better filters." Elias nodded, but something about Wraith's behavior nagged at him. A new urgency, almost desperation in the warriors' movements. They reached the edge of the radiation zone by evening. The landscape changed subtly, the ruins more extensively damaged. Unusual patterns of plant growth where nature had reclaimed the land, the air carrying a metallic taste even through the masks. "Single file," Elias ordered. "Keep moving. Don't touch anything. Don't remove your masks for any reason." Wraith took position at the front, leading them through a path that seemed invisible to everyone else, but was apparently clear to the silent warrior. Elias wondered again how Wraith knew this territory so intimately. They were halfway through the zone when the attack came. Not from behind where Sovereign's forces pursued, but from the ruins around them. Radiation had affected more than the landscape here. It had created another variety of the wasteland's mutated predators. These creatures moved on two legs, faster than crawlers, with elongated limbs and skin that had developed a chameleon-like ability to blend with surroundings. They emerged from hiding places among the ruins, targeting the middle of the column where the children and elderly traveled. Chaos erupted as people screamed and scattered. Elias fired at the nearest creature, shouting orders to form a defensive circle around the vulnerable. Warriors from New Haven responded quickly, but the attack had been perfectly coordinated to create maximum confusion. Through the chaos, Elias saw Wraith moving within human speed despite the earlier injury, intercepting creatures before they could reach their targets, blade flashing in the fading light. The silent warrior fought with even more intensity than before, as if driven by something beyond mere survival. They were losing light rapidly, which would only advantage the creatures. "Everyone move," Elias shouted. "Follow Wraith through the zone. Don't stop for anything." The community pushed forward in a desperate rush as their defenders covered the retreat. Elias found himself separated from the main group, fighting alongside Jacob and two others as they covered the rear. A scream cut through the chaos. A child had fallen behind, a young girl no more than 7 years old. Without hesitation, Elias ran back, scooping her up just as one of the creatures lunged from a hidden position. He felt claws rake across his back as he turned to shield the child. Pain lanced through him, but he kept moving, returning the girl to the retreating column. As he turned to rejoin the defense, he saw Wraith change direction, racing toward something or someone at the edge of the group. Following Wraith's path with his eyes, Elias saw another child in danger, a boy who had become separated from his mother. A creature was closing in, almost invisible against the ruined landscape. Wraith reached the boy moments before the creature, pushing the child towards safety. But in doing so, Wraith was left exposed. The creature struck, its claws tearing through Wraith's side, the same side that had been injured in the previous battle. Elias shouted a warning, already running toward them, firing as he moved. The creature fell, but the damage was done. Wraith staggered, one hand pressed to the freshly reopened wound, blood seeping between fingers. Rushing to Wraith's side, Elias supported the wounded warrior as they continued through the radiation zone. "Just a little further," he encouraged, though he had no way of knowing if that was true. He was following Wraith's lead as much as everyone else. By some miracle, they made it through the zone without losing anyone, emerging into clearer air as night fell completely. The pursuing forces of Sovereign seemed to have been deterred by the dangerous territory, at least temporarily. They made camp in the ruins of what had once been a small shopping center, posting guards in all directions. The wounded were tended to, supplies distributed, and exhausted travelers collapsed into uneasy sleep. Elias found Wraith sitting apart from the others, slumped against a wall, breathing labored beneath the mask. The wound was worse than he'd initially thought, blood soaking through improvised bandages. "Let me help," Elias said, kneeling beside the warrior with what remained of their medical supplies. Wraith didn't resist this time, as Elias carefully removed the blood-soaked bandages. The wound was deep, possibly infected from exposure to the contaminated environment of the radiation zone. "We need antibiotics," Elias muttered, "and better equipment. You need proper medical attention." Wraith weakly pulled out the notepad, writing with trembling fingers. "Almost there. Facility has medical supplies. If still intact." "If," Elias repeated grimly. "That's a big if to stake your life on." Something changed in Wraith's eyes then. A softening, almost a surrender. The warrior wrote again, more slowly. "Need to tell you." "Before." "Before what?" Elias asked, though fear was already rising in his throat. Wraith didn't answer, instead writing, "You remember Sarah?" The name sent another jolt through Elias's fractured memory. "I'm starting to," he admitted. "She was brilliant. Kind. We were." He hesitated, the emotion of the memory surprising him. "We were in love, planning a future, even as the world was ending." Wraith nodded, writing, "The accident. Do you remember?" Elias closed his eyes, forcing himself to face the memories he'd buried. There was a fire, an explosion in the lower labs. The containment systems failed. Everyone was evacuating. His breathing quickened as the memories gained clarity. Sarah. Sarah was trapped in the secure lab. The neural interface subjects were there. The fire suppression system had malfunctioned, was filling the room with chemicals instead of retardant. The horror of that moment hit him anew. "I tried to override the security locks. Couldn't get them open. She was screaming for help. I could see her through the observation window. The subjects were panicking. Some were violent from the interface instability. She was trying to help them, even as the chemicals." He broke off, the pain too fresh despite the decade that had passed. "The building was coming down around us. Security dragged me out. Said it was too late. I fought them, but..." He opened his eyes, wet with tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. "I left her there. I left her to die." Wraith was watching him with an intensity that seemed to burn through the mask. After a long moment, the warrior wrote something else. "She didn't die. Not then." Elias stared at the words, uncomprehending at first. "What? That's impossible. The chemical exposure alone would have." Wraith cut him off with another note. "Interface subjects protected her. Got her to decontamination chamber. She survived. How could you possibly know that?" Elias demanded, hope and disbelief warring within him. Wraith didn't answer, instead writing, "You need to lead them to facility tomorrow. Lower level access, 7294. Medical bay intact. Security measures still functional. You're coming with us," Elias insisted. Wraith shook their head slowly, writing, "Too injured. Slow you down. Sovereign's forces will catch up by midday." "I'm not leaving you behind," Elias said firmly. "Not happening." Wraith struggled to sit up straighter, writing with renewed urgency. "Must ensure others reach safety. You must lead them. Then we bring you with us," Elias countered. "We'll make a stretcher. We're not leaving anyone behind." The argument continued until Wraith's strength waned. The wounded warrior eventually conceded, allowing plans to be made for transport come morning. Elias stayed close throughout the night, checking the wound periodically, administering what little medicine they had, watching for signs of fever. By dawn, Wraith's condition had deteriorated significantly. The infection was taking hold, and blood loss had weakened the once invincible warrior. Still, they insisted on providing directions, marking a detailed map for Elias to follow. They departed as soon as there was enough light to travel safely. Wraith carried on a makeshift stretcher by 4 of New Haven's strongest. Progress was slower than the previous day, everyone exhausted from their ordeal in the radiation zone, morale fragile. Midday brought the sound they'd been dreading, engines in the distance. Sovereign's forces had navigated the radiation zone and were closing in fast. "We're not going to outrun them," Jacob said, his expression grim. Elias looked ahead to where the facility should be, then back at the dust cloud gaining on them. A terrible choice loomed, The community might make it if they moved faster, abandoned those who slowed them down. Wraith sensed his thoughts, reaching up to grasp his arm with surprising strength. The warriors scribbled a note. Go ahead with most. I will delay them. That's suicide, Elias protested. You can barely stand. Wraith's eyes conveyed what words couldn't: determination, acceptance, perhaps even peace. Before Elias could argue further, Rebecca approached. Elias, we need to make a decision. Now. The weight of leadership pressed down on him as he had never felt before. 300 lives depending on his choice. He looked at Wraith, then at the pursuing dust cloud, then at the scared faces of his community. We split up, he decided. Jacob, take our 10 best fighters. Create a diversion to the west, draw off some of their forces. Rebecca, you lead the main group straight to the facility. I marked the path on your map. Access code 7294 for the lower levels. He turned to Wraith. And I'm staying with you. 2 of us have a better chance than 1. Protests erupted from all sides, but Elias's mind was made up. The plan was enacted despite objections. Jacob led a small force to create a false trail, while Rebecca guided the main group toward the facility at their best possible speed. Elias helped Wraith to a defensible position among the ruins of what had once been a small gas station. They had limited ammunition, the element of surprise, and little else. This is a terrible plan, Elias admitted as they prepared their ambush. But it's the only one I could think of that didn't involve abandoning you. Wraith wrote weakly. Why? Why risk yourself? Elias considered the question, surprised by how simple the answer felt. Because no one gets left behind. Not again. Not like Sarah. Wraith finished in writing. Yes, Elias whispered. Not like Sarah. They waited in silence as the sounds of engines grew closer. Through binoculars, Elias could see that Jacob's diversion had worked partially. Approximately half of Sovereign's force had split off to pursue the decoy group. Still, that left dozens of fighters heading directly toward them. They'll see the main group's trail eventually, Elias noted. We just need to buy enough time for them to reach the facility, get those security measures online. Wraith nodded, checking the weapon Elias had provided, a semi-automatic rifle with 3 magazines of ammunition. Not much against the force bearing down on them, but it would have to do. The battle began with an explosion. Elias had rigged the abandoned gas pumps with the few explosives they'd brought, detonating them as the first vehicles entered the station's perimeter. The blast destroyed 3 vehicles and created momentary chaos among Sovereign's forces. Using the confusion, Elias and Wraith opened fire from their concealed positions, taking down several of Sovereign's fighters before they could identify the source of the attack. The remaining forces took cover, returning fire blindly at first, then with more precision as they located the defenders. Not bad for 2 people, Elias muttered as bullets peppered their position. But I don't think we're going to talk our way out of this one. Wraith managed a gesture that might have been a shrug, then pointed toward a partially collapsed building across the street. If they could reach it, they'd have better cover and multiple escape routes. On my signal, Elias said, readying a smoke grenade he'd been saving. 3, 2, 1. He threw the grenade, and thick gray smoke billowed out, providing a screen for their movement. They dashed across the open space, Elias supporting Wraith, who moved with obvious pain, but still faster than seemed possible for someone so gravely injured. They made it to the new position just as bullets began punching through the smoke cloud. The building, once a small convenience store, offered better protection, with concrete walls and multiple exits. They took positions at different windows, creating the illusion of more defenders. For 30 minutes, they held off Sovereign's forces, moving between positions, making every shot count. But their ammunition was running low, and Wraith was weakening visibly, the bandages soaked through with fresh blood. Through his scope, Elias saw Sovereign himself emerge from the rear vehicle, a massive man with a distinctive radiation burn scar covering half his face, wearing improvised armor decorated with trophies from conquered settlements. He directed his fighters with the confidence of someone unaccustomed to defeat. We need to take him out, Elias whispered. If we get Sovereign, it might buy enough time for the others. Wraith nodded, then wrote shakily, I'll draw fire. You take the shot." Before Elias could protest, Wraith was moving, gathering their remaining strength for one final effort. The silent warrior emerged from a side exit, firing rapidly to draw attention, moving in a zigzag pattern toward a water tower that would provide a clear line of sight to Sovereign's position. Elias cursed, then adjusted his position. Wraith had given him an opportunity, and he couldn't waste it. He steadied his breathing, lined up the shot as Sovereign's fighters turned their attention to the new threat. His finger tightened on the trigger, and then he hesitated. Something was wrong. Sovereign was smiling, gesturing to his men. Too late, Elias realized they'd walked into a trap. The ground beneath Wraith erupted as a hidden explosive was triggered. The blast sent the warrior flying, landing in a crumpled heap in the open ground between the buildings. "No!" Elias shouted, abandoning his position and running toward his fallen comrade. Bullets kicked up dust around him, but he barely noticed, focused only on reaching Wraith. He dragged the wounded warrior behind the cover of a destroyed vehicle, checking for signs of life. Wraith was still breathing, but badly injured, blood soaking through the tattered clothing. "Don't you dare die on me," Elias growled, applying pressure to the worst wounds. "We've come too far for that." Wraith's eyes fluttered open behind the mask, focusing with evident effort on Elias's face. A trembling hand reached for the notepad, but Elias shook his head. "Save your strength. The others should have reached the facility by now. We just need to hold on a little longer." More bullets struck their cover, and Elias heard approaching footsteps. Their position was being overrun. He fired the last of his ammunition, taking down 2 more attackers, then drew his knife. "I'm sorry," he said quietly to Wraith. "I tried." To his surprise, Wraith struggled to sit up, pushing something into his hands, a small device Elias hadn't seen before. It looked like a modified remote detonator. Understanding dawned. "You have more explosives?" "Where?" Wraith pointed weakly towards Sovereign's main vehicles, then made a gesture that clearly meant, "Now." Elias pressed the button without hesitation. The resulting explosion dwarfed their earlier one, engulfing Sovereign's command vehicles in a fireball that sent debris raining down across the battlefield. Screams and chaos erupted as the chain of command collapsed. "That was your ace in the sleeve?" Elias asked incredulously. "Why didn't you use it sooner?" Wraith didn't respond, slumping further against the vehicle, strength fading rapidly. The mask's filter was clogged with blood, breathing becoming visibly more difficult. Elias made a decision. "We need to get out of here while they're disorganized." He lifted Wraith as gently as possible, supporting most of the warriors' weight as they moved away from the battle. Behind them, Sovereign's forces were in disarray, some fleeing, others trying to establish anew. Command structure. They managed to put a half-mile between themselves and the chaos before Wraith collapsed completely, unable to go further. Elias lowered the warrior into the shelter of a shallow ravine, checking the wounds again. It was worse than he'd feared. Multiple injuries, severe blood loss, signs of internal damage. "Stay with me," Elias pleaded, using the last of their water to clean the worst of the blood. "Just a little longer. Maybe the others will send help once they're secure." Wraith's eyes locked onto his, conveying a message clearer than any words. Both of them knew that wouldn't happen in time. With trembling hands, Wraith reached up to touch the mask that had never been removed, then wrote one final note. "Need to show you. Before I go." "You're not going anywhere," Elias insisted, but the denial sounded hollow even to his own ears. Wraith's hand found his, guiding it to the edge of the mask. The meaning was unmistakable. "Are you sure?" Elias asked, something like fear gripping his heart. The mask had been Wraith's identity, the barrier between the warrior and the world. A single, weak nod was the response. Gently, reverently almost, Elias began to undo the straps that held the mask in place. As he worked, memories continued to surface, pieces of his fragmented past coalescing into a more coherent whole. Dr. Elias Mercer. The Prometheus Project. Neural interfaces designed to enhance human capabilities. Test subjects, volunteers hoping to become something more than human. Sarah Mitchell, his brilliant partner, The woman he loved, trapped in a lab with those subjects as the world collapsed around them. I should have saved you, he whispered, the words meant for a ghost, for a memory of a woman 10 years dead. I should have found a way to get you out. The last strap came free. Wraith's hand covered his, holding the mask in place for one final moment as the warrior whispered the first and only words Elias had ever heard from those lips. She was dying in his arms when she whispered, "Remove my mask, and you'll finally know who I really am." The voice was hoarse from disuse, barely audible, but it struck Elias like a physical blow. Something in the cadence, the pattern of speech. He removed the mask with trembling hands, and the world stopped. Beneath the mask was a face he knew better than his own. Older now, scarred on one side from chemical burns, hair cropped short and gray at the temples, but unmistakable. The same face that had been returning in fragments of memory. The same eyes that had watched him through the observation window as security dragged him away. "Sarah," he breathed, disbelief and recognition warring within him. She smiled weakly, her hand finding his. "Elias," she whispered, her voice rough from years of silence. "Found you. Finally." How? Was all he could manage, his mind struggling to reconcile the silent, lethal warrior with the brilliant scientist he had loved. "The subjects," she explained, each word clearly an effort. "They protected me, got me to the decontamination chamber. But the chemicals damaged my vocal cords, neural interface. It changed them, changed me. We merged somehow. Their abilities became mine." She coughed, blood speckling her lips. "After the collapse, I searched for you. For years. World gone mad. Became wraith to survive. Found rumors of a doctor leading settlers. Followed the trail. Why didn't you tell me?" Elias asked, cradling her gently. "Why the silence, the mask?" "Wasn't sure. It was really you at first," she managed. "Your memories, you seem to have forgotten everything. And I'm not the same person. Needed to be sure you were safe. That the community was safe." Another coughing fit racked her body. Elias held her closer, feeling her life slipping away with each labored breath. "The facility," she continued, her voice fading. "The research, it's still there. Intact. Security measures operational. Safe haven for your people. And the cure. For the interfaces. We developed it, remember? It's in the lower lab. Could have saved me once. Too late now." "It's not too late," Elias insisted, tears flowing freely now. "We'll get you there. We'll find the cure." She shook her head slightly. "No time. Listen, what happened, the accident, wasn't your fault. Security protocols. Auto-locked the lab. Nothing you could have done. I should have found a way," Elias said, his voice breaking. "I should have saved you." "You did," she whispered, her eyes never leaving his. "By remembering. By leading them to safety. By not leaving me behind." At the end, her breathing became more shallow, her grip on his hand weakening. "Sarah, please," Elias begged. "Don't leave me again. Not now. Not when I've just found you." She smiled once more, a peace in her expression that transcended the pain. "Not leaving. Just going ahead. Remember me. Remember us. Before the world ended." "I remember," he promised, holding her close as her breathing faltered. "I remember everything now." "Good," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's all I wanted." Her eyes closed, her body relaxing in his arms as her final breath escaped in a gentle sigh. Elias held her, rocking slightly back and forth, his tears falling onto the face of the woman who had crossed a wasteland to find him, who had protected him and his people without revealing herself, who had given her life to ensure their survival. In the distance, he could hear vehicles approaching, likely the remnants of Sovereign's forces regrouping. But he couldn't bring himself to move, to leave her. A familiar voice called his name. Looking up, he saw Jacob approaching with several fighters from New Haven, sent back from the facility once they'd secured it. "Elias, thank God you're alive. We need to go. Now." Elias nodded numbly, gathering Sarah's body in his arms as he stood. "Help me with her," he said quietly. Jacob looked confused as he saw the unmasked face for the first time. Wraith was a woman? Who? Her name was Sarah Mitchell, Elias said, his voice gaining strength. Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She saved us all, and I'm taking her home. They reached the research facility as night fell, finding the community already establishing themselves in the secure lower levels. The nuclear-hardened structure had survived the collapse remarkably intact, with functional power systems, water filtration, medical facilities, and supplies that would sustain them for months, if not years. Sovereign's forces, without their leader and with their forces divided, eventually retreated from the region. New Haven's people began to build a new life in the facility, safer than they had been since the collapse. Elias buried Sarah in the facility's atrium, where a garden had once grown and would grow again. He placed her mask beside her as a monument to her courage, her sacrifice, and her determination. In the weeks that followed, he immersed himself in the facility's records, in their old research, piecing together what had happened in those final days before the collapse. He found Sarah's journals, her documentation of what had happened after he'd been dragged away, how the test subjects, despite their unstable condition, had worked together to save her, getting her to safety before succumbing to their own injuries or to the chaos of the collapse. He found their research on reversing the neural interface effects, the cure they'd been developing together. Too late for Sarah, but perhaps not too late for others who might still exist in the wasteland, similarly affected by the experimental technology. The weight of the past remained with him, but no longer crushed him. The memories, both painful and precious, became part of who he was, Dr. Elias Mercer and the leader of New Haven both, no longer divided by forgotten history. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he would visit Sarah's grave and speak to her, as if she could hear, telling her about the community's progress, about the future they were building in the shelter she had led them to. "You found me," he would say. "Across a wasteland, through the end of the world, you found me. And in finding me, you helped me find myself again." In the atrium, plants began to grow once more, seeds from the old world sprouting in soil nourished by hope for the new. Life continuing, as it always did, even after the end of everything. And in the quiet of the night, when memory and dreams blurred together, Elias sometimes felt her presence. Not Wraith, the silent warrior, but Sarah, the woman who had loved him enough to cross a wasteland to ensure his survival. In those moments, he understood that some bonds transcended even the end of the world, reaching across time and tragedy to find their way home. In the facility that had once been dedicated to enhancing human potential, humanity found something more valuable, a chance to begin again, to remember what had been lost, and to build something new from the ashes of the old world. A memorial not just to Sarah, but to all they had been before and all they might become again.